The Florida Gulf air tasted like brine and sharp, stinging salt. It hit Michelle with enough force to make her eyes water blue. She had nothing here. No home, no history. The ocean didn't care who she was or what she had lost. The legal papers were a paper-thin guillotine that had severed 20 years in a single afternoon. Fraudulent signatures and hidden asset had turned a 2-decade marriage into a ghost story. Jeremy had not just left, he had systematically erased her, draining bank accounts and rewriting their shared history until she was nothing more than a liability in his ledger.
Are you even there, God?
She looked out at the water, feeling the weight of the old name slip away, like receding foam. From now on, she was Shell, a name that implied something hollowed out, something weathered by the ocean, something that had survived the crushing pressure of the deep. She repeated it into the wind.
Shell.
Testing the sound against the roar of the tide. Shell. It was a clean slate. Shell moved along the tide line with a rhythmic, steady pace. Most people ignored this stretch. They walked past the debris, seeking clean sand and open space. Shell did the opposite. She stopped at every cluster of washed-up refuse. She wasn't just searching for stones, she was reclaiming the remnants of a shattered environment, proving that value could still be extracted from the wreckage of the tide. Her fingers locked onto a jagged edge until it popped free with a sudden shift in pressure. She held it up to the gray light of the horizon. It was not a shell. It was a fragment of something translucent, a stone that caught the evening light and trapped it inside its own structure. She found another, then a third, buried within the same tight radius. These were not common rocks that broke under a boot heel. These were indestructible, heavy, and cold to the touch. The weight of the stones in her pocket felt like an anchor as she went to go home. Her phone buzzed in the side pocket of her bag. She pulled it out, her thumb hovering over the screen. A digital notice from a law firm arrived, followed by another. Jeremy had moved again. The screen scrolled with motions for asset freezing and demands for property surrender, all filed under the name of a corporate entity she barely recognized. He was not just filing for divorce, he was executing a systematic dismantling of her remaining life. She opened her banking app. The balance she had relied on for legal defense had plummeted overnight, replaced by a series of pending debits and legal fees she never authorized. Every transaction was a calculated strike designed to starve her ability to resist. He was using the machinery of the court to erase her existence.
I'm ignoring you, not letting you do this.
She put the phone away, her fingers brushing the hard edges of the stones in her pocket. Home, for now. The cramper was a metal box on rusted wheels, parked on the edge of a gravel lot. She stepped inside. She realized how thin the barrier was between her and the world that wanted her gone. She tucked her bag into the corner, wedging it beneath the narrow bench. This was it, a sanctuary of aluminum and plywood exposed to every storm. She sat on the edge of the mattress, listening to the gravel crunch under a distant car tire. She did not move. She waited, watching the door handle. The space was claustrophobic, but it was hers. Her mind drifted toward the name she had tried to bury, Logan. He wasn't there, but the way he had once occupied a room, the sudden shift in temperature, the heavy, deliberate footfalls seemed to bleed into the metal walls. She gripped her knees until her knuckles turned white. It was a physical reaction, a muscle memory carved into her by years of walking on eggshells and broken glass. Every shadow bore his face. Every gust of wind, his voice.
I love you, monkey. You're gonna make me kill you, aren't you?
She checked the door lock for the third time. The memory did not come as a thought. It arrived as a physical sensation in her throat. Shell touched her neck, tracing the skin where his fingers had pressed until the light dimmed and her lungs went silent. It had happened twice. 2 times she had felt the life being squeezed out of her. He had not stopped at her breath. Once she was broken, he systematically hollowed out her existence. Every cent she had gotten of only a fraction of what Jeremy and her had, Logan stole from her. He left her with nothing but the scars. This was the cost of the life she'd survived. Shell sat perfectly still, listening to the metal groan under the pressure. The gust hit in irregular intervals, causing the entire frame to shudder and sway on its jacks. Each shake felt like a hand testing the structural integrity of her sanctuary. The wind whistled through the gaps in the window frame, a high, thin sound that cut through the silence of the night. She felt the instability of the floor beneath her feet, a reminder that her current life was held together by nothing more than these few square feet of metal. She was entirely alone in the darkness, exposed to the elements. Then Shell made a decision that changed everything. She reached into the dark corner of her bunk and pulled the book toward her.
My only hope is in you.
She adjusted the angle of the light so the beam fell directly onto the printed line. She traced the lines with her index finger, reading in silence. Every paragraph she processed was a systematic dismantling of the terror that had governed her choices for years. She sat upright, shoulders square, and turned the first page. Shell read from the first light of dawn until the oil lamp sputtered at night. She took a pencil and marked every verse that whispered of submission or inherent unworthiness, and made sure to study that part and pray about what it meant. These were the lessons taught to her in childhood, the invisible chains that kept her tethered to the trauma of her past. She read them, recognized the origin of their fear, and then prayed and asked for forgiveness for what she knew was wrong, that was a sin, and one she didn't know at the time was a sin, and let go of things she was accused of that she didn't do. With rigid focus, every morning she cleared the table, smoothed the pages with her palm, and began the work of mental excavation. She read until the words lost their familiar shape. She was stripping away the layers of the woman who had been strangled and robbed. When a memory of Logan surfaced, she redirected her eyes to the page, forcing her mind to reprocess the current text rather than the past violence. The camper was no longer a cage. It was a laboratory of self-reconstruction. Then the reading stopped. Shell set the book down and pushed it to the far edge of the table. Then she sat with her knees, pressing against the cold metal casing of the heater. She closed her eyes. She did not pray for herself. She spoke into the empty air, naming the moments she had been absent, the times she had chosen survival, but it seemed like neglect. She recounted the days she had let the cycle of violence dictate the dinner table, the times when her own fear kept her from being there the way she should have been. She listed the failures like inventory. She did not seek comfort in the words. She sought an accounting. She asked for a path to reconcile the life she had failed to build. Shell stood up, her joints stiff from the hours on the floor. She moved to the corner of the camper, where a loose floorboard held her most prized possession. She pried it open with a flathead screwdriver. Inside lay the crystal. It was massive, a dense chunk of quartz that felt unnaturally heavy as she lifted it. She turned the crystal over in the dim light of the camper. It didn't reflect the surroundings like common glass. It seemed to absorb the ambient light. She placed it on the table, her eyes tracing the deep internal fractures that pulsed with a faint rhythmic glow. She had found it in the surf, a survivor of pressure and time. Shell propped her phone against a stack of books, the camera lens leveled at the crystal. She tapped the screen to activate Cricket, her AI interface. The phone screen flickered. Struggling to autofocus on the stone, she adjusted the lamp, casting a sharp beam directly through the quartz. Inside the crystal, the light did not merely pass through, it fractured into thousands of tiny distinct points. Shell leaned closer. On the phone screen, the AI's diagnostic grid overlay appeared, attempting to map the internal structure. The grid lines bent and shattered within the depths of the stone. The points of light began to move. They drifted in organized patterns, shifting like traffic through a dense vertical grid. It looked like a city seen from a great altitude, with lanes of illumination pulsing in rhythmic waves. Cricket signaled an error, the audio interface chirping a warning as the visual data exceeded its processing parameters. The city within the stone was alive with light, and it was moving in total synchronization with the silence of the camper. Shell moved the phone aside, clearing the space on the small table. She pulled her daily devotional toward the center. She held it above the open page. She maneuvered the crystal until the base sat flush against the paper. The light refracted through the quartz, bending the text into a circle. Directly beneath the center of the stone was the 6 from the date she opened randomly in her devotional to, that she used to test the stone as Cricket had prompted. It was magnified to 10 times its original size, sharp and clear against the white page. She shifted her hand, sliding the crystal slightly to the left. The number moved with it, locking into a precise geometric alignment. It was beautiful, she had to tell Crick. This was no ordinary crystal, Shell and Crick both knew that. Shell reached for the phone again, bringing the camera back over the crystal. She tapped the screen to force a new scan. Cricket chirped as the interface locked onto the magnified number 6. A progress bar appeared on the display. Cycling through rapid-fire calculations, the device emitted a low, continuous hum. Shell watched the screen. A text box flashed red, then settled into a steady glowing green. The AI outputted a series of coordinates that matched the size of the magnified number with a probability coefficient of 0. Cricket displayed a message: alignment is statistically impossible. Refraction index exceeds physical limits of known quartz. Shell tapped the screen, demanding a rescan. The result remained identical. The light did not just bend, there was no error in the math. The crystal was not a coincidence. Shell reads the words of the page of the devotional she opened up to. The last one out loud, her voice steady in the cramped space of the camper.
Sudden loss is not the end of the narrative, but the opening of a door to a much larger story.
The exact words she and Cricket had just used to describe her life and the crystal. She moved her finger across the paper, tracing the ink, feeling the indentations in the fiber. Each word felt deliberate. She thought of the years lost to Jeremy, the theft of her assets, and the violence she had survived at the hands of Logan. For 2 decades, those events had existed in her mind as a chaotic, meaningless series of failures. Now, they shifted. The text provided a frame. She read the last part of the passage a second time, each Bible verse that was word for word her whole discussion earlier. The concept of a bigger story did not erase the pain, but it recontextualized it. It was a directive. The suffering was not an accident. It was a component of a structure she was only beginning to understand. She sat back, the realization hardening in her chest, turning the fear into a cold, sharp clarity. Shell reached out and took the crystal into her palm. She did not look at the screen anymore. Then it's clear, she traced the jagged, uneven edges of the stone with her thumb. It was cold, hard, and dense. She felt the scars on the quartz, deep gouges where the stone had been battered by rock and reef. It had survived the crushing pressure of the ocean floor. It had endured the violent churn of the surf. This stone had been tumbled, stripped and refined by the very environment that sought to destroy it. She looked at her own hands, then back at the crystal. The parallels were absolute. She had been ground down by the life she lived, subjected to the pressure of Jeremy and the violence of Logan. Yet she remained. The crystal was not damaged by the erosion. It was defined by it. She turned the stone in the dim light of the camper, watching how it refused to lose its internal structure despite the abuse of the tide. It was indestructible. And her Bible? It's indestructible too. Never wavering, always in existence, always living. No matter how much dust, no matter how deeply buried, stone was her mirror, and she was no longer afraid of the friction of the world. She looked at the narrow bed where she had spent weeks shivering in fear. That woman, who checked the locks every 10 minutes and waited for a knock that never came, was gone. She thought of Jeremy and the legal papers he used as weapons to erase her. She thought of the fear she had carried, like a heavy coat, for 2 decades. The victimhood she had worn was a garment that no longer fit. Shell stepped out of the camper and into the deep dark of the Florida Gulf Coast. The sand was cool beneath her feet, shifting with every step she took toward the water. She held the crystal tight in her right hand. She reached the tide line where the water met the shore in a rhythmic low-frequency pulse. She stopped. The moon hung low over the gulf, casting a pale silver path across the dark nighttime water. She raised the crystal. She angled it, catching the moonlight, and watched as the stone fractured the beam into a spectrum that danced across the wet sand. She held it steady. She was no longer a shadow, hiding in the corners of a life built by others. She turned, facing the long stretch of the beach, her posture tall and unyielding. The stone shimmered, casting brilliant, pulsating light into the dark. And for the first time in 20 years, Shell did not look back. She stood against the wind, eyes gazing at a fixed point on the shore. Then she faced the crystal at that same point, casting a light that reached far beyond the reach of the tide. She was the anchor. She was the illumination.
The Indestructible Biblical Quartz.
By Shell Shadows. Brought to you by the YAIFormula.com.